She woke at 3 a.m. to the sharp scent of wet wool, iron, and expensive cedar. The mattress sagged. She reached for the lamp, but a heavy, scarred hand pinned her wrist to the sheets. "Get out of my bed," she snapped. The terrifying cartel boss just smirked and pulled her closer. The radiator in apartment 4B had a rhythm. Clank, hiss, rattle. It was the ugly metallic white noise Naomi relied on to drown out the relentless sirens bleeding in from 8th Avenue. But tonight, there was a new sound in the room. A steady, shallow intake of breath. It was coming from right next to her ear. Naomi froze. The cheap spring mattress sagged drastically on the left side, pulling her body weight toward the center. The scent hit her next, an intrusive, violent wave of wet wool, the unmistakable copper tang of blood, and the sharp, expensive bite of cedar cologne. She didn't scream. Screaming in this neighborhood only annoyed the neighbors, and working the graveyard shift at an off-the-books clinic had beaten the panic response out of her years ago. Instead, her right hand slid slowly under her pillow, her fingers searching for the cold, hard plastic of the taser she kept there. Before her fingers could even graze the grip, a heavy, calloused hand clamped around her wrist. The grip was loose, but immovable, a casual display of overwhelming physical advantage. "Don't!" a voice rasped in the dark. It sounded like gravel grinding under a heavy boot. Naomi ripped her arm away, twisting violently against the tangled bedsheets to face the intruder. The weak amber light from the street lamp outside filtered through the cracked plastic blinds, slicing across his face. Ivan Castelli. He lay flat on his back, still wearing a bespoke charcoal suit jacket, the silk tie loosened haphazardly around his neck. His eyes were half closed, heavy with a brutal, hollow exhaustion that made his sharp, aristocratic features look skeletal in the shadows. He didn't look like the untouchable head of the city's most vicious syndicate. He looked like a man who had just crawled out of a car wreck. "Get out of my bed," Naomi snapped. Her voice shook, but not with fear. It was a sudden, spiking rage. Ivan didn't flinch. A slow, dark smirk touched the corner of his split lip. "Make me," he murmured. Instead of retreating, his arm slid around her waist, heavy as a dead weight, and he pulled her flush against his side. He didn't do it with a lover's gentleness. It was a territorial, grounding maneuver. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his cold nose pressing into the warm skin just below her jaw. He let out a long, ragged exhale, his broad chest shuddering once before settling into stillness. Naomi lay paralyzed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her cheek was pressed against the rough wool of his jacket. It was damp. Rain, maybe. Or blood. She placed her hands flat against his chest, intending to shove him off the mattress, to scream, to call the police, though calling the cops on Ivan Castelli was a surefire way to end up in a landfill in Jersey. "Castelli, I swear to God," she hissed, pushing against his sternum. "I will stab you in the neck with a ballpoint pen. Get up." "Shut up, Naomi," he mumbled into her skin, his voice muffled and thick with sleep. "Just shut up for 5 minutes. I'm tired." "Then go sleep in your mansion." "They know about the mansion." The smirk was gone now. His grip tightened around her waist, locking her against him. "They don't know about this shithole. Nobody knows about you." That silenced her. 3 months ago, he had bled out on a linoleum floor in the back room of the clinic where she worked. A rival outfit had caught him slipping outside a restaurant in Queens. The doctor on call had been too drunk to hold a scalpel. So Naomi had dug the 2 hollow-point bullets out of his shoulder and rib cage herself. She had stitched him up, wiped the blood off his face with a cheap paper towel, and told him not to die on her shift because she didn't want to do the paperwork. He had laughed, a wet, bloody sound, and left $10,000 in a brown paper bag on the reception desk. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. Now he was here, bleeding onto her cheap polyester sheets. She could feel the hard, angular weight of the holster strapped beneath his jacket pressing uncomfortably into her hip. He was a walking target, an apex predator seeking shelter in a rabbit hutch. She stopped pushing against his chest, not because she surrendered, but because she felt the heavy, unnatural rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palms. He was completely out. In less than 2 minutes, the terrifying, ruthless Ivan Castelli had fallen into a dead, dreamless sleep, using her as a human security blanket. Naomi stared up at the water stains on her ceiling, the anger slowly draining out of her, replaced by a cold, cynical resignation. She couldn't move him. She couldn't fight him. And heaven help her, she was too tired to try. "If you bleed on my mattress," she whispered to the empty room, "I'm billing you for a new one." Naomi woke to the smell of burnt coffee and sizzling grease. For a brief, disorienting second, she thought she was back in her childhood home. But the dull ache in her neck and the stiff mattress quickly grounded her. Then the memory of the night before hit her like a bucket of ice water. She shot up in bed. The left side of the mattress was empty. The sheets were twisted and stained with a dark, rust-colored smear of dried blood. She threw off the covers and marched out of the bedroom, her bare feet slapping against the scuffed hardwood floor. Ivan was in her kitchen. The sight was so absurd it momentarily short-circuited her brain. He had discarded the ruined suit jacket and the holster. He stood by her cheap electric stove in a wrinkled, blood-stained white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was using a plastic spatula to flip a piece of bacon in her warped frying pan. He didn't turn around as she walked in, but he spoke over the crackle of the grease. "Your coffee machine is a tragedy. It makes battery acid." "Then don't drink it," Naomi said, crossing her arms over her oversized t-shirt. She leaned against the door frame, watching him. "And don't cook my food. You're trespassing." I replaced it. Ivan finally turned to look at her. In the harsh morning light pouring through the kitchen window, he looked worse than he had in the dark. The bruise on his jaw was an ugly, mottled purple. There was a shallow cut above his eyebrow, crusted with dried blood. But his eyes, dark, predatory, and hypervigilant, were wide awake. He gestured to the small dining table. Sitting next to a ceramic mug of steaming terrible coffee was a thick stack of $100 bills, easily 10 grand. Naomi stared at the money, then looked back up at him. She didn't look impressed. She looked annoyed. "I don't want your money, Ivan. I want you out of my apartment." He turned off the stove and leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms. He studied her for a long moment. Most people withered under that stare. Men twice her size had broken down and wept when Ivan Castelli looked at them like that. Like he was mentally calculating the exact amount of effort it would take to dismantle their lives. Naomi just raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You're not afraid of me," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, tinged with genuine curiosity. "I've seen you cry over a lidocaine injection, Castelli. Hard to be intimidated after that." A low, rich chuckle rumbled in his chest. He reached up, wincing slightly as he rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't cry." My eyes watered. The lighting in that clinic was harsh. "Right, the lighting." Naomi walked past him, ignoring the money on the table, and poured herself a mug of the terrible coffee. She took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Who shot at you this time?" The humor vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, blank mask. "Internal disagreement. Nothing you need to concern yourself with." "It's my concern when you track blood onto my floor and use me as a body pillow," she fired back, slamming the mug down on the laminate counter. The coffee sloshed over the rim. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is for you to be here?" "For me?" Ivan's jaw tightened. He pushed off the counter, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Suddenly, the kitchen felt suffocatingly small. He towered over her, the sheer physical mass of him blocking out the sunlight. The scent of him, smoke, coffee, and that dark cedar, wrapped around her. "Do you think I'd come here if I couldn't protect you?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "There are 3 men watching this building right now. Grant is parked across the street. Carmine is in the alley. Nobody gets within 100 yards of this fire escape without my permission. Oh, great. The Mafia is loitering in my alleyway. My landlord will be thrilled." She tilted her chin up, refusing to back away, even as her pulse drummed frantically in her throat. "That doesn't answer my question, Ivan. Out of all the safe houses, all the penthouses and luxury hotels you own, why my apartment?" He looked down at her. The anger in his eyes flickered, breaking apart for a fraction of a second to reveal something entirely different. Something raw, desperate, and deeply exhausted. He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against the side of her neck. His fingers were warm. "Because," he said quietly, his thumb tracking the line of her jaw, "for the last 3 months, every time I close my eyes, I see the ceiling of that clinic. I see your face looking down at me. And last night was the first time I've slept more than 2 hours since you dug that lead out of my chest." Naomi's breath hitched. She hated the way her body betrayed her, the way her skin warmed under his touch. She was a cynical woman. She knew how the world worked. Men like Ivan didn't have hearts. They had ledgers. They took what they wanted, consumed it, and discarded the remains. She slapped his hand away. "I'm not your sleeping pill, and I'm not your shelter." "I know," he said softly. He didn't look offended by the rejection. In fact, he looked like he expected it. He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "I'll be gone in an hour. Once Grant gives the all clear." He turned back to the stove, casually transferring the bacon to a paper towel. Naomi watched his broad back, the way the white shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. She noticed a dark, fresh stain blossoming near his lower ribs. He had torn his stitches. "Sit down," she sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Ivan paused, glancing over his shoulder. "What?" "Your side is bleeding again, you idiot. Sit down at the table and take your shirt off. I'll get my kit." A slow, victorious smirk spread across Ivan's face. He didn't say a word, just unbuttoned the cuffs of his shirt. Naomi turned and walked toward the bathroom, hating herself for the tiny, treacherous flutter in her chest. She was patching up a monster, and worse, she was getting entirely too used to having him in her kitchen. The rubbing alcohol cut through the smell of bacon grease and stale coffee, sharp and medicinal. Naomi snapped a pair of blue nitrile gloves over her wrists. She didn't have a proper sterile field, just a clean dish towel laid out on the laminate table, holding a needle driver, a spool of nylon suture, and a bottle of betadine. Ivan sat backward on one of her cheap wooden dining chairs. He had stripped off the ruined shirt, exposing a torso mapped with violence. Pale, raised scars crisscrossed his ribs and shoulders, a brutal ledger of a life spent in the crosshairs. The newest addition was on his left side, just below the rib cage, a jagged 2-inch tear where the heavy sutures from his last clinic visit had pulled through the muscle. Fresh blood seeped into the waistband of his trousers. "You tore 3 stitches," Naomi said flatly, soaking a cotton pad in iodine. "Probably when you threw your 200-pound body onto my mattress." 220, Ivan corrected, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the wood of the chair. He rested his forearms on the backrest, his dark eyes tracking her every movement. "Congratulations. Hold still." She pressed the soaked pad directly into the open wound. It was a vicious, stinging pain that would have made most men shout. Ivan didn't even flinch. His jaw locked, a muscle ticking violently beneath the bruised skin. But his breathing remained perfectly even. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. Naomi threaded the needle, her hands steady. She had done this 100 times in the clinic, patching up gangbangers and corner boys who couldn't risk a hospital visit. But doing it in the harsh daylight of her own kitchen, with the boss of the city's most dangerous crime family watching her hands, it was entirely different. She took a breath and drove the curved needle through the tough skin. "You have a heavy hand, Naomi," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "It gets the job done." She pulled the nylon taut, tying off the first knot. The physical proximity was suffocating. She was standing between his spread knees, leaning over him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his bare skin. Close enough to smell the remnants of his cedar cologne mixed with copper. "Why do you work at that slaughterhouse?" he asked suddenly. It wasn't idle chatter. His eyes were dissecting her, searching for the underlying mechanics of her life. "You're better than a back-alley stitch job. You could be at Sinai. Presbyterian. Sinai requires a spotless background check and a tolerance for hospital politics," Naomi replied, tying the second knot and snipping the thread. "I have a misdemeanor for aggravated assault from when I was 19, and I hate authority figures. The clinic pays in cash and doesn't ask questions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Aggravated assault. Who did you hit?" "A guy who thought no was a suggestion." Ivan's smile vanished instantly. The air in the kitchen dropped 10 degrees. The casual, exhausted man from the bedroom was gone, replaced by the apex predator. "Is he still breathing?" "I broke his jaw with a tire iron," Naomi said, wiping away a stray line of blood. He breathes through his mouth now. "We're done." She stepped back, stripping off the bloody gloves and tossing them into the trash can. Before Ivan could reply, a harsh electronic buzzing fractured the quiet of the apartment. It was coming from the pocket of his discarded jacket on the floor. Ivan stood, moving with a fluid grace that belied the fresh stitches in his side. He retrieved a cheap black flip phone, a burner. He didn't check the caller ID before flipping it open. "Speak." Naomi watched him as she scrubbed her hands at the kitchen sink. The transformation was absolute. The soft lines of exhaustion hardened into stone. "When?" Ivan asked into the receiver. A pause. "Where is Dominic?" "No. Tell Carmine to burn the warehouse. All of it. If they want the shipment, let them choke on the ashes." He listened for another 5 seconds, his dark eyes entirely devoid of light. "I don't care who signed off on it, Luca. Find them, and make it loud." He snapped the phone shut, the plastic cracking slightly under his grip. He stood in the center of her small living room, a storm gathering in the confined space. "I have to go," he said. The warmth, the banter, the bizarre domesticity of the morning was dead. I figured. Naomi dried her hands on a towel, keeping her voice carefully neutral. She walked over to the table and picked up the stack of $100 bills. She walked up to him and shoved the money hard into his bare chest. Take this with you. I told you. I don't want it. Ivan looked down at the money, then back up at her. He didn't take it. Instead, his hand shot out, his long fingers wrapping around the back of her neck. He pulled her forward, not violently, but with an unstoppable gravity. He bent his head, his mouth hovering a fraction of an inch from her ear. Keep the money, Naomi. Buy a deadbolt. Buy a gun. Do not walk home alone after dark. You're scaring me, Ivan, she whispered, and for the first time it was the truth. Not because of him, but because of what he was dragging her into. Good, he breathed. His lips brushed against the shell of her ear, a touch so gentle it felt like a lie. Be scared. Be smart. Grant is staying on your block. I don't want a babysitter. He's not a babysitter. He's a deterrent. Ivan finally pulled back, picking up his bloody, ruined shirt and pulling it over his shoulders. He didn't bother buttoning it. He grabbed his suit jacket and his shoulder holster. He walked to her front door, pausing with his hand on the cheap brass knob. He looked back at her, standing in her oversized t-shirt in the middle of a kitchen that suddenly felt like a target. I'll see you, Naomi. The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place. Naomi stood alone in the quiet apartment, the scent of expensive cedar lingering in the air like a ghost. She looked down at the dining table. The blood-stained towel was still there, and so was the money. 72 hours. For 3 days, the city felt like a coiled spring. The clinic was slammed with the fallout of whatever war Ivan Costelli had ignited. Naomi pulled bullet fragments out of thighs and stitched up knife wounds on men who refused to give their real names. The violence was escalating, a localized earthquake rattling the criminal underworld, and she was standing at the epicenter with a roll of gauze. True to his word, Grant never left her street. He was a mountain of a man who lived in a black SUV parked next to the bodega. He never spoke to her. He just watched. At first, Naomi hated it. By the third night, when a black sedan crawled past her building with its headlights off, she was deeply, terrifyingly grateful. It happened on a Thursday. The rain was coming down in sheets, a cold, miserable downpour that turned the asphalt into a black mirror. Naomi's shift had ended at 2 a.m. Her umbrella had flipped inside out 3 blocks ago, leaving her soaked to the bone, her scrub jacket clinging wetly to her arms. She turned the corner onto her street, her head ducked against the wind. The black SUV was parked in its usual spot, but the driver's side door was open, the interior light glowing weakly in the rain, empty. Grant wasn't there. Naomi froze. The steady rhythm of the city felt wrong. The hair on the back of her arm stood up beneath the wet fabric of her jacket. She reached into her pocket, her cold fingers wrapping tightly around the plastic grip of her taser. She began to back away, aiming for the bright lights of the bodega on the avenue. I wouldn't, a voice said from the shadows of her alleyway. A man stepped out into the amber glow of the street lamp. He wasn't Grant. He was lean, wearing a dark raincoat, and the right side of his face was covered in a sprawling, ugly tribal tattoo. His right hand was buried deep in his coat pocket. The shape it made was unmistakable. Naomi, right? The man smiled. It was a thin, joyless expression. Costelli's little Florence Nightingale. You have the wrong person, Naomi said, her voice completely steady despite the violent hammering of her heart. Keep calm. Assess the exits. I'm a nurse. I don't know who you're talking about. Sure you don't. The man took a step forward, closing the distance to 10 feet. That's why he left his best attack dog parked on your curb. Too bad Grant caught a tire iron to the back of the skull 10 minutes ago. Naomi's blood ran cold. If Grant was down, she was entirely alone. Dominic wants to have a chat, the man continued, taking another slow step. He's real curious why the untouchable Ivan Castelli spent the night in a dump like this when half the city was looking to put a bullet in him. Get in the car. He gestured with his chin toward a gray sedan idling 20 yards down the street. No, Naomi said. She pulled the taser from her pocket, the metal prongs catching the streetlight. I'm not going anywhere. You shoot me here, the bodega owner hits the panic button, and the cops are here in 2 minutes. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think I care about the cops? I'm getting paid $50 grand just to put you in the trunk. Dead or alive, sweetie, it's your call. He pulled the gun from his pocket. A suppressed 9mm. Naomi braced herself, her finger hovering over the taser's trigger, knowing it was useless at this range. She was going to die on the wet pavement. Thwip. The sound was shockingly quiet. It sounded like a heavy book dropping onto a carpet. The man with the tattoo stopped smiling. His eyes widened in sudden, profound confusion. A perfectly round, dark hole appeared in the center of his forehead. For a second, he just stood there, suspended in the rain. Then, his knees buckled, and he collapsed face forward onto the concrete with a wet, heavy thud. Naomi let out a strangled gasp, stumbling backward until her spine hit the brick wall of her building. From the deep shadows of the alleyway, a figure emerged. Ivan. He was dressed in a long black overcoat, completely impervious to the rain. In his right hand, he held a sleek black pistol with an elongated suppressor. He didn't even look at the dead man at his feet. His dark feral eyes were locked entirely on Naomi. He looked like the devil himself, cold, magnificent, and utterly devoid of mercy. He smoothly holstered the weapon inside his coat and walked toward her. His boots made no sound against the wet pavement. Are you hurt? His voice was rough, scraping against the sound of the rain. Naomi shook her head, unable to find her voice. Her whole body was trembling now, the adrenaline crashing through her system, leaving her violently cold. She looked at the body on the ground, the dark pool of blood washing away in the rain. Grant, she choked out. He's alive, concussed. I have men pulling him out now. Ivan stopped right in front of her. He reached out, his large warm hands wrapping around her shivering arms. You killed him, she whispered, staring at the corpse. I did, Ivan said, absolutely zero remorse in his tone. And I will kill Dominic before the sun comes up. No one touches what is mine. Naomi's head snapped up. The fear burned away, instantly replaced by the familiar fiery defiance that kept her sane. I am not yours, Castelli. I am not a piece of territory you can mark. Look around, Naomi, he snarled, suddenly pushing her back against the brick wall. It wasn't to hurt her. It was to trap her. He planted his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. The heat rolling off his body was intense. You think Dominic cares about semantics? You think the rest of the commission cares that we haven't slept together? You saved my life. You let me into your bed. In my world, that makes you mine. It makes you a target, and it makes you my responsibility. I never asked for this, she shouted back, pushing hard against his chest. It was like pushing a brick wall. I told you to get out of my apartment. I told you to leave me alone. And I tried, he hissed, his face inches from hers. The rainwater dripped from his dark hair onto his sharp cheekbones. For 3 days, I sat in a warehouse covered in other men's blood, and all I could think about was the smell of your cheap coffee and the way you look at me like I'm nothing special. He dropped his forehead against hers. His breathing was heavy, ragged. The terrifying mob boss was gone, stripped down to the desperate, exhausted man who had crashed into her life. "I tried to stay away, Naomi," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "I can't." Naomi closed her eyes. She should run. She should pack a bag, take the 10 grand sitting on her table, and disappear to the Midwest. But as his hand moved from the wall to cup her face, his thumb stroking the wet hair away from her cheek, the cynical, rational part of her brain quietly shut off. She opened her eyes. She didn't push him away. Instead, her hand slid up the slick, wet fabric of his overcoat, her fingers gripping his lapels. "If I die because of you," she said, her voice a fierce, trembling vow, "I will haunt you for the rest of your miserable life." Ivan's dark eyes flared with something that looked dangerously like worship. A smirk, devastating and possessive, curved his lips. "I'm counting on it," he murmured, and then he pulled her closer, his mouth crashing down on hers, tasting of rain, darkness, and inevitability. Naomi kissed him back, knowing with absolute certainty that she had just signed her own death warrant. And heaven help her, she didn't care. Did Naomi make the right choice, letting a ruthless monster under her covers? Or did she just sign her own death warrant by getting tangled in the Castelli family war? Drop a comment below and let us know what you would do in her place. If you loved this dark, gritty romance, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next thrilling audio drama. The tension is only getting started.